guys, Luke and Sarge here, and welcome back to another episode of the Young Professionals podcast. Luke, who do we have on the show today?
Sarge, I'm very excited today to be talking with Emily Wallace, who is a buyer's advocate running her own business, predominantly in Melbourne's southeastern suburbs. Emily started her education journey studying a Bachelor of Arts and Education at Monash University in Melbourne, having moved up from Hobart in Tassie to Melbourne after high school. But before she started her undergraduate degree, Emily took a gap year where she ended up working as a nanny in the UK at only the age of 17. Starting her professional career in recruitment after uni, Emily later decided to take the plunge into the property industry and enrolled in a buyer's advocate course that she had discovered online. Having not looked back ever since, Emily has her hands in many different pots, including being the co-host of her own podcast, My Millennial Property, which maybe a few of you have heard of, and co-hosting another property segment on TYPP, which is a new news streaming platform, predominantly on the social networks, and as well as running her own buyer's advocate business. So Emily, really nice to have you on the show today and looking forward to the chat.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm actually very excited about this one. Very excited.
Oh, cool. Well, I think there's a lot to unpack in your journey that we kind of really touched on just then. But to start off, why don't you run the listeners through rather exactly what a buyer's advocate is and what they do day to day, and then maybe kind of put a bit of context and color as to how that role fits into the property industry in more generally.
Sure. So for listeners who have never heard of what a buyer's advocate is, and that probably is quite a few of you because everyone sort of goes, what's that job? It is effectively a personal shopper for homes, and I specialise in family homes. So in real estate, you have real estate agents. Everyone knows what a real estate agent does. The term buyer's advocate or buyer's agent means that we represent the buyer in the transaction. So my day-to-day is very varied. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of inspections of properties across Melbourne. It's trying to find those properties, so sourcing them by calling agents, emailing, using social media. And then client management, getting the clients through the properties, ensuring that they like them, that they're a good fit, whilst also trying to bring in more business as well. It's a bit of a juggling act between servicing who we have and then making sure we've got more clients to come through as well. So in terms of how that fits into the property industry, it is a growing area in Australia. It's very much the done thing over in the US, and we like to copy the US most of the time. So I'm sure you'll hear of more advocates popping up in the coming years.
And why would someone engage a buyer's advocate?
Really good question. I think there's quite a few reasons. The main reasons, number one, people don't buy property every day of the week. It's sort of a once, twice or three times in your lifetime event that you do. So people like to outsource to an expert who does that weekly. The other thing is it's very, very time consuming to find a property, to actually make sure you're looking at all the options. And the third thing is people are scared. People are scared of negotiating. They're scared of auction bidding. It's very intimidating and it's very emotionally fueled. So they engage us to take the emotion out of it, to make sure they're not overpaying for properties, and to put forward as many options as possible so that they're getting the best choice of what's available in the stock that's there at the moment.
And are there any key drivers from your perspective for that? Or when doing that diligence, what are some of the key things that you're looking at on behalf of your clients?
So I think that first and foremost, the biggest thing is choice. And we're looking to make sure we've got as much choice as we possibly can. So off-market properties, which means the property's not listed on realestate.com or Domain. They're actually like a blacklist almost of properties that are exclusive to advocates. So doing that. And then once we've actually found the properties, it's making sure that it's a good purchase. And by that, I mean, the resale value is going to be good. Structurally, it's actually going to stand up for the time that the people want to live in the property, and that there's nothing wrong with the house or nothing that can't be fixed. And also to make sure they're being aware of what price point that property falls within, because the last thing you want to do is overpay for a property and then have to wait for it to grow in value to actually get your money back. That's not very effective, even when it is your family home. So that's a really big piece of due diligence as well.
Emily, on that, I think particularly talking to probably the younger listeners, back end of high school, early uni, probably their only really exposure into kind of what a real estate agent or a buyer's advocate does is maybe going to an auction here and there or open house with their parents. What is the main difference between a real estate agent and a buyer's advocate? I know it's kind of obvious now that you've run through what you do, but do you just want to touch on that and make that super clear for people interested in the industry?
Definitely. It's a really, really good question. And obviously younger listeners, you may not have been super exposed to real estate just yet, but I'm sure the time will come. So to give you a really clear understanding, a real estate agent is engaged by the person selling the property, which is also known as the vendor, and they're paid by the vendor. So they get a commission, which is usually a portion of what the property ends up selling for, and they get paid by the vendor once the house sells. A buyer's advocate is independent, so we're not aligned to any one agency. We're not a real estate agent. We're a buyer's advocate, and we're paid by the buyer to do the work for the buyer, and we're paid to be engaged by them strictly by the buyer, not by the seller. So they're very different sides of the fence, but it is easy that people do often go, oh, so you're a real estate agent. No, very different.
There's we'll go back to a good example that I saw you post on LinkedIn, this is probably a few months ago, when, asking the question, why would I get a buyer's advocate? And I think one of the reasons that you said was, if you're going to court and you're going up against someone, the other person's got a lawyer, you're probably going to want a lawyer as well. So it's really that representing both sides of the table in that what is a really important transaction in terms of buying and selling property. So I think that's a good one. But on that, I think the whole LinkedIn presence and making your personal brand a real structure of what your career is kind of becoming is something that I want to talk about in a little bit. But why don't we go back to kind of the start of things when you were still in high school back in Hobart? Do you want to run us through what you were thinking your career would probably look like after, say, year 12, if you're in year 10 and year 11, thinking about what subjects you'd be doing and maybe what university courses you'd be doing after that?
Sure. So I'm certain there's many year 10, 11, 12 students who listen to this podcast and they're trying to find some answers on where they should go, what they should be doing. And they're probably fed a lot of things from their school as well. I mean, school is there to help you get to the next level, but school is only showing you so much of real life. And I think when I was in year 10 doing subject selections for year 11 and 12, I was really stressed. I didn't want to pick the wrong ones. I wanted to make sure I had choice. No one ever really stopped and told me that what you pick in year 11 and 12 isn't the be all and end all. There was a lot of pressure because I think in that point in time, that's all you're focused on. You're not actually thinking, hang on, maybe there's another world out there beyond these school doors. So yes, I think it was a time where I was a bit unsure. And then when I finished year 12, I decided to have a gap year, but I'd already enrolled at Monash and deferred my enrolment for a year to be in the teaching space. The reason I picked that is I believed I was very good with kids. And to be honest, it was very much driven by what I'd been shown I could do at school, what the options were for me. And also they had good holidays apparently. So I thought that was a good incentive to be a teacher, which is absolutely not true. Please don't listen to that. That's not true of teachers. They don't really get very many holidays. Thinking about education, think hard about it. But yes, that honestly was the driving factor as to why I wanted to pick education. It's pretty simple, but yes.
And when you were studying education, was it what you thought it would be?
Short answer, no. I think it wasn't until my final year. So I actually decided in my final year, so the fourth year into the course, that I didn't want to be a teacher. And the reason I had decided that was because I did my placement where I was a lot more involved. So the placement where you actually go and teach in a school for an extended period of time and you have the same class for the whole year. And I was rewarded but in a different way. So for me, and I think this comes down to your measure of success as well. Everyone has a different measure of how they're successful. My measure of success was at that point in time, and this has changed a lot, but at that point in time, I wanted to keep climbing a ladder. I wanted to be the next thing. So a team leader, and then I wanted to be, in decision-making positions, and then maybe principal. That was my idea of climbing a ladder. And I'm very impatient. And I think our generation is very impatient. And I realized being in education is a time game. It's about how long you've been there for, not necessarily how good you are. And that's very frustrating. So it was, in my final year. I actually, at the time, I lived in a share house with 6 other people, which was crazy. I actually moved myself out of that share house and into an apartment on my own just to get through the final semester, because I knew if I wanted to actually pass it, I had to isolate myself. So I did. And I finished it. I wasn't going to, do 3.5 years and tap out. I had to do 6 months more, but I had decided, and I knew I wouldn't be a teacher, but I wanted to finish the degree, and I'm very glad that I did.
And why didn't you want to be a teacher?
So that sort of, I guess, measure of success for me, I wasn't finding that in teaching. The reward was very much, kids. You can see individual kids doing really well and you can impact their learning. But I actually found that it wasn't as fulfilling as I had hoped it would be. And I was almost a little bit defeated, I guess. It wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. And therefore I started to think, well, how am I going to meet my expectations of what success is, and be excited about going to work and getting that gratification that, everyone seeks gratification for the job that they do. And I just kind of worked out that I needed that in a different way. I still, at that point, when I didn't want to be a teacher on my final year, I still actually didn't know what I was going to do. I very much stumbled across the job that I then ended up in on Seek. That's just how it happened. And people often fall into jobs. When you hear people say, I just fell into it, people literally do just fall into jobs, and it works out really well for them.
On that, Emily, I think an important point that you make is that, being a teacher didn't necessarily align with what you wanted out of a career and what you found fulfilling. But that's not to say that, if what you find fulfilling is, helping those students really develop over a longer period of time, and you're not necessarily wanting to become that team leader or whatever it is, that doesn't mean that teaching isn't a good thing and you should go for it. It's really just about what is best for you as an individual, I guess.
You've got to work out what makes you tick, and then find out what roles that aligns to, because unless you try it, you don't know. I wouldn't have known I didn't want to be a teacher unless I did the placement. So that's what those things are there for. But yes, to any listeners who are, unsure about what career path they want to take, I think a large part of it is trying things to understand and speaking to people in those industries to understand what it's like. And obviously listening to a podcast like this as well is super helpful. But yes, trying before you commit, I think, is a really important thing.
I think it's a great point. And on that, we want to obviously get into your journey from education into what you're doing now. But going back a couple of steps, can you just step us through the gap year experience and what that decision kind of looked like, and who you spoke to and what the influences were there?
Sure. So full transparency, the gap year was, I actually finished school when I was 17. I was allowed to start a year earlier. And so most people in Tassie finish school when they're 18, and 18 is obviously a big deal. When you're 18, you can go out. So one of the key drivers, as silly as this sounds, is I didn't want to go to uni not being 18. I didn't want to miss out. And my birthday wasn't until April, so I knew I'd miss out a fair chunk of things. And I'm very much a rule player, so it just wasn't on the cards to, half be part of things. I wanted to properly be 18 and do it properly. So that was a driving force, if I'm honest, but also the decision to actually be a nanny and go to the UK. I knew I wanted to travel. I mean, Tassie's such a small place, and there's probably listeners who are maybe in small country towns or only ever really lived in a bubble. I grew so much in that year because I travelled on my own for the first time ever. I'd only ever been on family holidays. I had to navigate, the London Tube. I went on a Kentucky tour for 3 weeks with a group of people I'd never met before, and I was the youngest person. There was all these things that I did that when I came back, I was so outgoing. I'd really wanted to speak to people and learn. I think the best thing out of a gap year, a lot of people think of a gap year as a year to make money, I think. I don't know if that's still the thing because it's been a number of years since mine, but I remember a lot of people like, I'm going to get a job that I'm going to work really hard and make a lot of money on my gap year. To me, I think the purpose of a gap year is to grow and to come out of being a school, rigid and like school-like, and actually become an adult and do adult things and mix with other adults before you go to uni. So yeah, the decision, I'm so glad I had it. I wouldn't be the person I am today if I didn't have the gap year, I think. I probably would be a bit more shy and a bit more introverted. But yeah, I'm really, really glad. And anyone thinking of it, I would highly recommend a gap year personally. I think it's a great thing to do.
It's definitely something that I wish I did. I was having a conversation with my mother the other night, and one of my reflections, particularly since we've started talking to people and doing this, was that I wish I knew more about the gap year program and the sorts of things that you could do, because I think, like you said, it's a fantastic maturity curve, and you do get the opportunity to be an adult and just be an adult and experience that, rather than have to go straight from school into uni and go from studying one thing to studying another thing.
Yeah, definitely. Breaking it up, I think, is really important.
I think it's going to be a particular maybe point of consideration for students coming out of year 12, this year. Maybe job prospects might not be as great given everything that's going on in terms of COVID and whatnot. But there seems to be a debate around the whole gap year thing with, say, parents saying, it's best to go into uni or into education straight away. And that might be the best case scenario, but it would seem like, and interested to get your thought on this, Emily, that the apprehension from parents who are a little bit older is that, you might go into, say, full-time work as an 18-year-old, get used to getting a full-time wage, and then be like, this is actually okay, this is fine. But I think to your point, it's not really about the earning the money part. Like, that's probably going to come. It's about the life experiences you get doing different things that you probably don't have the opportunity to do, when you're 30 and maybe have a mortgage or whatnot. You can't just go away for a year and do different stuff randomly.
Yeah, 100%. To anyone listening who's debating a gap year and they are feeling like their parents don't want them to do it, or they think it's the wrong thing to do, or they could do something differently, I think the biggest thing is to know in yourself what you need, and that to appreciate that times are different from when your parents were coming out of that process. And maybe they're fearful that you'll have a gap year and you'll love it so much that you'll just never go to uni. And that's fine. If you don't want to go to uni, you don't actually have to go to uni. That's not the point. I think the biggest thing that you can do, and the most mature thing you can do, is to back your own decision and trust in the process of yourself. Because I can tell you now, I wouldn't be where I am and as happy as I am if I'd listened to, first of all my friend influences of what they were doing, and second of all, my parents. My parents are super supportive, absolutely. But if I'd listened to everything they thought I should have done, I would not be running my own business. I would not be in Melbourne, and I wouldn't be as happy as I am. So I think it's a big hurdle for people to get over, but trust yourself. Don't necessarily trust what your parents say all the time.
On the topic of trusting yourself, Emily, what drove you to get into the property game, and how did you come to be a buyer's advocate? So
yes, it was a big element of trusting myself in that process. Little old me I'd bought a property. I mean, that was, a significant milestone in purchasing an investment property, but that was the only exposure I had to buying houses. And then here I was starting a business in helping other people to buy houses too. And to be honest, a lot of people speak of imposter syndrome and that they feel like that maybe, why can I do it? It comes down to self-trust and self-belief massively. The way I got into the business, literally, I saw an advertisement on LinkedIn for a buyer's agent course. It said, do you want to quit the 9 to 5 and help other people buy property for a living? And I was like, that sounds like me. That sounds great. And some people might think that that's, you got roped into some scheme. It absolutely wasn't. It was purely a learning course. I spent 2 hours on the phone to the CEO of that learning course that evening and decided that was the course for me to do. Now, you won't find this course at uni. You won't even probably hear that it's even an option. I came across it. I was one of the first students to go through and to graduate that course, and it taught me everything I needed to know in being a buyer's advocate and also running my own business. But the fact of the matter is, I actually didn't want to go out on my own in the beginning. I actually called every advocate I could find on Google listings and asked if people would have me as, like a junior advocate to train me up, because I actually didn't back myself enough to think I could do it on my own. The response I got was that I didn't have enough experience. Now, I know this must come up in your podcast all the time about experience, and maybe we can touch on that in a second, but the experience piece, I was like, well, where am I going to get experience? People want me to have experience, but I'm calling you so I can get experience. I have no experience. Anyway, I was forced into, forced is probably a bit harsh of a word. I was lightly pushed into doing it on my own. And I'm honestly so glad I did, because you know what? Now I call upon all different advocates to get their point of view rather than being trained by one of their way of doing it. I do it my way, which is a combination of everybody else's way that are effectively my competitors, but we talk and we share. So definitely I had to back myself on that more than I ever thought I would have to. And it turned out for the best, but it was absolutely not easy to do at all.
Emily, I think a big part of what you're doing is, going out on your own and starting your own business and stuff that you kind of talked about. Was that something that excited you, or was it really kind of stressful and worrying? And if it was the latter, how did you deal with that? And if it was exciting, where did that kind of come from? And have you always had that drive, do you think?
So it was honestly a mixture of both. I think the biggest fear part of it was money. And that's, anyone who tells you they're not worried about money when they're starting their own business, they're probably lying, because it is the financial burden of like, oh my gosh, where is my next dollar coming from? I don't have a salary coming in every fortnight. This is really scary. That was the part, but I weirdly became comfortable with being uncomfortable about money. And it actually drove me to do better, because when you have to go out there and find people to use your service because, without sounding desperate, but because you need to put food on the table, you'll find a way to find a client, funnily enough. So it's kind of about setting the stakes pretty high so that what's riding on that is to push you. But I don't think that's for everybody, because the anxiety around the financial piece. I quit my job too soon. That was the problem. I thought I had enough money. I didn't. You're never going to have enough money to start a business, to be honest. There's always costs that come up. Just do it if you can. But that was that piece. As for being excited, yes, I'd always wanted to run my own business. I had my first business idea at 14 and I still want to start that business. Well,
or is it a secret?
It's a funny story. Well, look, it's registered, so I hope no one will steal it. It's fine. It's already registered. But it's okay. Let me ask you a question, and it's a bit of a personal question, actually. When you have like an event on or something, maybe you're going to study for an exam, or maybe you've got your first day at work. When you open your undie drawer, do you pick a certain pair of undies?
No.
Oh.
No.
Damn it. Okay. Absolutely not.
Wrong answer.
I'm very boring though. I know a lot of people that do, and socks.
Okay. So people do have lucky undies. It's a thing that people pick out a certain pair and they make them feel better. Maybe it's more of a girl thing than a boy thing. I don't know. Anyway, lucky undies was the business, and it was something that I had just written a note in my phone. I started designing these lucky undies of different events that people could wear them for, different, occasions, such as a job interview, first day of school, a kids range for, coming out of toilet training, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, that was my first business. I've had many, many business ideas since, but the one I obviously love the most is the buying advocacy. It's, the best business I think I ever could have gone into.
On the topic of business ideas and coming up with business ideas, like what is the driver, or why does it appeal to you so much as opposed to being an employee and working at a company?
The biggest thing is you're your only limit. You are the limit of what is possible in that sense. When you're working for a company and you've got an idea, generally speaking, yes, companies are supportive, but there's a process to go through. You've got an idea, you've got to give it to the team leader, who gives it to the manager, who gives it to the general manager, and then the CEO, and then there's a chain of events. That's why people want to climb the ladder, right? So they can get to the top to make more of the big decisions. But I think the biggest thing in the appeal of having your own business is you are the decision maker, and that comes with a lot of responsibility. Don't, doubt that. But it also comes with a lot of empowerment, because whatever choice you make, you back yourself on that, and you can see the outcomes happening because of a direct choice that you made at that point in time. So I think that's the biggest draw card for me, is I love making choices and then seeing them unfold and knowing that was my decision and no one else's.
And on that topic, maybe a bit of a philosophical question. What does your decision-making process look like? I
am a very quick decision maker. So I'm not someone who analyzes a lot of stuff. And the reason for that is I believe the decisions I make at any point in time was the best decision I could have made with what I had available to me. That is literally my decision-making process. What is the best decision, weighing up this and this, which one at the time? And you will make it the right decision, as in you'll follow through on that and you'll make it work, I believe. So I know a lot of people are planners, these people who are planners, and they could have everything lined up before they can make the decision, and they need 3 days to think it over, and then they'll come back and ask a few questions and then they'll make a choice. No, not me. I literally go, it's either A or B. We'll stick whichever one it is. I'm not going to dwell if the other one was a better choice. I'll make the one I picked work. And I think that's where people go wrong. They go, oh, what if I had done this? What if I'd done that? Don't worry about what if you could have done. What have you done and what can you do with that now and move forward? I think that's probably an insight into my brain of how decision-making works. It's very straightforward. Don't complicate it.
I would imagine that, in your particular field of work where people are making literally $1 million decisions about their life, that they would probably want to, know some more information or weigh things up or plan things out. How do you balance your perspective on decision making with, I guess, empathizing with that of your clients?
You hit the nail on the head. Empathy. Empathy is one of the most underrated skills you could possibly ever have. To imagine what it would be like in someone else's situation on the other side of the fence in anything you do in life gives you the ability to almost become that person and understand what it would be like for them. And yes, sometimes my patience internally is like, I can see what the right decision is for them. I have to let them come to their own choice on that. So yes, it is tricky. It is tricky when you're very good. I've considered myself a good decision maker. I make decisions, quite immediately. Some people would say that's a bad thing because I don't have all the facts. But yes, you do have to balance it. And I understand when people are spending a couple of $1 million on a property, it's not a yes or no question. It's a let's have a think about it. Let's weigh it up. And I empathize with that. And that honestly is the key thing, empathy. You must have empathy.
I think that's an important trait to have, or a skill to get better at. Doesn't matter what industry you're going into, even if you're working with clients or internally or whatever it is, you need to be able to empathize, as you say. Emily, I do want to get to eventually your other pots and pies that you've got your fingers in, like we said at the start. But I think a big part of, at least from an outside perspective, a big part of what has gotten you there is your work on really developing your personal brand. And that's obviously something that has enabled you to grow your business relatively quickly. Do you want to talk to that, and when, I guess, what made you realize that is a really important thing to do, particularly, in the world of social media and whatnot now, and kind of how you went about that?
Certainly. So first and foremost, for anyone listening right now, I would strongly suggest that if you're thinking about personal brand, that you go and check if your domain name is available. So your first and last name, .com or .au, whatever it is, go and secure it. It costs you like $12 a year to keep it. Personal brand, people buy people. People don't buy companies anymore as much as they used to. Yes, brands are great for recognition, but we've come to this point in life where people value individuals. So I think, personal brand is massive. Building that out means that you really have to know yourself, I think. If you're trying to explain to other people how you are as a person, first of all, you need to be aware of yourself. And second of all, you need to be confident in yourself and the message that you're putting out. A lot of people hesitate to post on social media or to gain a following because they're worried about what other people think. The thing that they fail to realize is those people are more worried about what other people think of them than what they're thinking about you. So especially at this, I assume a lot of listeners are sort of sitting between that 15 to 20 years old, potentially a bit older, but we're so glued to social media and an image of what we should be. The people that you probably admire the most, if you think about who you follow on Instagram, they're probably people who are just really real. They just share things. Like I know there's one girl on my Instagram who constantly posts pictures with like a double chin. She has a double chin. A lot of people have a double chin, but she puts it in with captions and it's funny and it's relatable. And I actually feel more connected to her than seeing people pose with their Louis Vuitton bags or their Gucci slippers or whatever they've got. So yes, personal brand, register your domain name as a person, no matter what, because you just don't know where it's going to go in the future. but having a voice of your own brand, keeping in line with who you are, and then also associating with other people. This is in business and in life, other people who are complementary to your brand and to who you are. Don't go, I've said no to so many deals, as it were, and I mean clients and I mean other partnerships, because they didn't suit me. They weren't me. They didn't speak the same language as me, and that's fine to say no. Definitely keep in line with who you are as a person when you're thinking about personal brand.
You spoke about alignment there, and it's pretty cool that people can reach out to you and want to partner with you. But I imagine that wasn't always the case, because when you started at zero. How did you build up from zero?
I think how you build up from zero is you start and you don't stop. Consistency in what you put out in content, but also setting. The biggest thing I learned to do was to set KPIs, so key performance indicators for myself. I'd been in roles where I had to meet these certain criteria each week. My boss would be on my back if I didn't. That's a real good skill I learnt in corporate that I then put into my own practice of being consistent. 20 calls a day without fail. 20 calls. Don't care if you don't know who they are. Call them, speak to them, get to know them. Must post a video every day. All these things that were consistent, and it's just accumulation of all these things that have gotten me to a point where people have started to recognize who I am and actually want to do work with me. But that does not happen overnight whatsoever. And it's a grind, and most people give up. Most people give up at the 3-month mark. Too hard. And I know, because I got to 3 months and it was damn hard. But once you push through that point, you'd be surprised what comes your way when you're putting things out and what comes back.
Just to add a little bit of context here, Emily, particularly for people that haven't come across your profile on, say, LinkedIn or other social media platforms, like you've got quite a substantial following on, particularly LinkedIn is where I saw you. I think you're up nearly 10,000 followers or something like that. But you've really only been in the buyer's advocate game for 3-4-ish years. Is that kind of accurate in terms of a timeline?
Only 2 years, actually. We had a 2-year birthday 2 weeks ago. So only 2 years. Apparently is in pretty good growth. I mean, I haven't studied business, so I don't know what to expect in terms of, I don't know what's considered good, okay, or excellent, but people tell me that it does take a long time to build out a following and to build out brand recognition. That's the biggest thing. People being able to recall, who's that girl, what's her name, what does she do? And that's honestly down to consistency of social media content. But not just sticking anything up, it has to add value to the person who's watching or listening. It has to add value, because, you know, a pretty photo here or there, it shows who you are, but it doesn't actually add any value to the person consuming that content.
I think that's spot on. And for anyone that is interested in, say, a property or becoming a buyer's advocate, like jump onto Emily's LinkedIn and you'll see what we're talking about in terms of, you know, you've got different segments like Top Tip Tuesday and stuff like that, where you'll post a probably 30-second or 1-minute video every Tuesday about a tip in the property market, that kind of thing. But I think bringing it back to something that it can be a bit more tangible for, say, students coming through in any industry, really, in terms of the personal brand, it might be, right, you need to develop something that you can talk to in an interview where you're trying to get an internship in, I don't know, law or commerce or whatever it is. Things that you can do are, you know, create a blog and set a KPI. I'm going to write an article every week, or I'm going to do X fill in the blank every week or every day. And then at the end of, say, 3 months or 6 months, like you'll have a pretty nice portfolio that a lot of other people probably won't have. So do you want to maybe talk to what other recommendations you could give students that aren't necessarily geared to property, but they could be doing generally?
100%. I think that's a really good tip about the blog. I think the more passion, like genuine passion and interest you can show for the industry you're considering going into, when it's time for people to hire, you are going to stand out like insanely well. And people underestimate the small acts that do accumulate over time and make them really look like a superstar and like an absolute no-brainer to hire them. A few things that I would think about, yes, doing the blog, but even just signing up to the newsletters within the industry itself, whatever that may be for you. Build yourself a LinkedIn profile. I cannot believe how many young people don't have LinkedIn. LinkedIn doesn't matter if you don't have work experience to post on there. Be someone who actually contributes. Be a contributor, not a poster. You don't have to post. You can contribute to other people's content. LinkedIn works where you can actually search hashtags. So say, for example, you want to get into accounting. #accounting. Search it on LinkedIn, find posts that are related to accounting and put your 2 cents worth, read the article and give a comment. It shows that you're starting to learn and you're upskilling. The other thing I would say that's really underestimated is using initiative of coming to the table with ideas. So, for example, I recently hired someone, and this is applicable to any industry, it doesn't have to be property. And the person I ended up hiring, she said, Emily, would it be okay if I started a YouTube channel featuring some houses? Is that okay if I start that? Like, I know I'm working for you, but I'm really passionate about this. Could I start a YouTube channel? Of course you can. That shows that you're super passionate about what industry you're in and you're actually creating your own personal brand, even though you're working with me. And I think that is really important to realize that you don't have to be stuck into someone's company. You can actually have a personal brand within that itself. Don't underestimate that. You're not just a number in a company. You are a person who has a personal brand.
On that, Emily, what advice do you have for students who are thinking about what tertiary pathway to take next year and what careers they might want to pursue?
Well, I think first and foremost, listening to podcasts like this that have a variety of different industries on it to get a glimpse as to what it might be like, what days might look like. I think, yes, you might pick a degree and you might not end up being in that degree, and that's fine. I think a lot of people come unstuck where they're like, I'm doing accounting, so I have to be an accountant. No, you don't have to be. There's plenty of people who have found success in their own right by finding a career that they really, really love. I think it's a matter of looking at, what does my ideal day look like? Okay, is it being in an office? Some people actually genuinely love being in an office doing desk-based work. They love that. They thrive off admin. They thrive off numbers and data entry, all that sort of stuff. Other people, they have to be in a job that they're on the road and they're seeing different things all the time. So I think if you're looking at picking a degree that you want to study, you don't have to do that job at the end of the day that you do end up studying. Great if you do, absolutely no problem with that, but you don't have to. I think it's understanding what your ideal day looks like and what degree best suits that to have a pathway into different options.
And Emily, I think we're almost at the end, and just a good one to kind of wrap up on, I think. And based on your method of decision making, I'm not too sure that there will be, but do you have any major regrets that you kind of look back on and think, oh, I should have done that differently?
The only thing I wish I'd done differently is I wish I'd started my own business sooner. However, I also am grateful for the point in time that I did start it, because everything wouldn't have aligned the way it had. So it's not a regret. It's more of a reflection of, gosh, I wish I'd been almost in this longer than I have already, because I love it so much. That's all it comes from is the love of actually doing what I do now. And I wish I'd jumped off that cliff sooner. But you're right. The decision-making process, I don't really have a lot of regrets, because I know that's the best decision at that point in time, but don't sit on things too long. Don't think about them too long. Just do them. Don't think, just do, because the longer you think, the more you won't do.
I think that to extrapolate on that in terms of other industries as well, it's like you don't know what you're kind of contemplating until you've gone and spoken to someone in the industry, or gone and done an internship, or volunteered for a week, or whatever. You actually find out what that person does day to day, and then you can make a more informed decision on that. So I think fantastic advice, and everything you've said today, I think, would be super, super helpful for everyone listening. Emily, thanks a lot for coming on today. Really appreciate your time. I think, as I said, heaps of good little nuggets of advice for people to take away.
No worries at all. I've absolutely really enjoyed, and hopefully, people do think about their pathways and where they're going, and to definitely look into different avenues outside of what would be considered the norm. And I think the biggest takeaway from everything is to actually just back yourself on your decisions, trust that you're doing the right thing, and seek advice where you need it.